So, Mr. Chris,
Hey, Johnny.
today we're going to talk about revolution, the differences between colour revolutions and normal revolutions, and what's going on today in America and Western civilization at large. So, what are the differences between a colour revolution and your average historical revolution?
Well, they both use very similar tactics. A color revolution is sort of technically when an outside force foments revolution inside a country. Okay, so if we take somewhere like Ukraine as a good example, right? It's kind of like a speeded up version of the same kind of process. So, generally speaking, the preparatory phase can take like a decade if you like really speed it up. You get a bunch of sort of society organizations. They go into a country, they spread propaganda, they communicate with the youth, they take over media, and during this phase, everything that the government tries to do to push back against this force is taken as evidence that the government is bad. Okay, so in color revolutions in being done by sort of Western countries, right? The way they kind of do it is they come in and they say, oh, your country needs more democracy, more freedom of speech, more all of this kind of stuff, right? And then they deliberately start flooding propaganda into that country, usually aimed at the youth, because the youth are not only the most susceptible, but they are also the easiest to mobilize, right? It's the youth that are going out marching in the street. It's the youth that are also susceptible to very, very simple arguments, right? So a really good example of this is you tell the youth of a country that they should join the EU because they'll be able to travel, right?
Yeah.
It turns out, as we saw with the COVID thing, that travel is an amazingly sort of useful device to get people to do what you want. You know what I mean, right? Like, so the people, the children in these countries who then advocate for, say, joining the EU or moving closer to the West or whatever, usually do so because of a cultural feeling, right, that is usually transported in through TV and music, right, and a sort of attachment to very high-sounding ideals that have very little to do with how the thing they're about to join actually functions. So look at Ukraine, for example. If they had said to the youth of Ukraine, right, you should support Euromaidan because there's going to be a massive war and hundreds of thousands of you will die, obviously no one would have supported that, right? So instead, they came in and said, you need to join the EU for democracy and freedom and all these kinds of like things. The UN does exactly the same kind of thing. The vaguer the promises of the revolution, in a lot of ways, the better, right? Because then you can just make it up as you go along, and once the revolution has happened, you can be like, oh, well, when we said freedom, we meant this, right? And because no one asks for a precise definition of freedom, no one asks for a precise definition of democracy, this works. I mean, look at the EU, right? They are a profoundly undemocratic body. Profoundly undemocratic. To say that the EU, wants a country to join for democracy is complete and utter bullshit, right? The EU is a power block like any other, ruled by an unelected council and all these non-governmental bodies. But it's these non-governmental bodies that are very powerful. So that's the opening phase, right? 10, maybe 15 years, okay? You got to have long enough for one generation of youth to sort of grow up with this stuff in the schools, like around them, and then hit sort of 18, 20, old enough to like march for whatever bullshit, okay? At the same time, your security and intelligence services will be going around trying to infiltrate as many governmental bodies as possible, right? They'll start up foundations, they'll give grants for like certain stuff, and just generally start fucking with the milieu of the country, trying to create stuff to go wrong. And again, as I said, every single time the government tries to push back against any of this, it is taken as evidence that the government is highly anti-democratic and so therefore needs to be overthrown. So it's it's the Chinese finger trap. If you try and resist the color revolution, that is taken as a sign that you need the color revolution. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
And it's always much easier for the revolutionaries to do this because they can basically promise whatever the fuck they want because they have never been in power. There's no past record to look to. right? The populace can't say, oh yeah, we did this revolution before under you guys, right? And it didn't turn out, or you guys have been in power. This is why they don't, for example, run for political office, right? This is one of the things about revolutions. You see this with Extinction Rebellion. They don't run for office, because if they did run for office, not only would they have to explain their positions in terms of policy. So, someone might be like, when you say freedom, what the fuck do you mean? When you say freedom of speech, what do you mean? Blah, 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 blah. They just make an end run around that. Then at some point, once everything is prepared, you have some kind of trigger event, right? Whether or not this trigger event is something that you wait for, or whether or not it's something that you manufacture, opinions differ, right? On the one hand, if you destabilize a country enough, right, these events are bound to happen sooner or later. And as long as you control the media, you can, keep an eye out for an event that matches the narrative you're trying to push. And then when it happens, you blow it up all over the national media. So in one of the Arab Spring revolutions, I think it was in Tunisia, it was all sparked by this street side vendor getting his thing set on fire, I believe, or he, I think maybe he self-immolated. My point is, it was just one event. It was basically like George Floyd. George Floyd is the classic trigger event, right? So you either wait for one of these things to pop off, or you engineer it yourself. You know what I mean, right? Then once that thing happens, you use your control over the media to blow it up and blow it up and blow it up and blow it up until it becomes like the only thing that anyone can think about. And because it supports the pre-planted narrative from the people that are trying to do the revolution, inexorably, the solution comes to, oh, well, this incident, right, is emblematic of a deeper problem. And the only solution to that deeper problem is revolution, okay? Once you got all the kids fired up, right, and they're out in the streets and stuff like that, then you basically bring in military force in a color revolution, right? So you bring in actual military people to either make things much worse. So in Euromaidan, for example, there were like a bunch of snipers that just started firing on people while they're in Maidan Square and just killing a whole bunch of people. I mean, it wasn't like a massacre. I think it was like 8 or 9 people got shot by snipers, right? And you use this as cover to like whip people up in the hope that the government will topple, right? And I think in Ukraine, the president actually had to flee the country. I think Poroshenko actually had to flee the country because he was, and so a government in this situation is basically caught in another finger trap, okay? They either send troops out to stop the protests, right? In which case it confirms that they are an authoritarian government that needs to be overthrown, or they do nothing and get overthrown, right? Marxist politics is full of these Chinese finger trap, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. I don't know what the exact word for it is, but it's an amazing way to conduct politics, right? Because you give people two choices, both of which lead to the outcome that you want, right? The illusion of choice or whatever. Then once the government has fallen or been widely discredited, pushed out of power, you may need to use your military to take certain key infrastructure points. So if you talk about the revolutions that happened in the Baltic states, this was happening as the USSR was falling, probably like the first sort of blush of the whole color revolution thing happened in the Baltics in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. You send troops in to grab critical information infrastructure. Back in the day, it used to be the TV station was the big thing. You had to make sure you got the TV tower, Nowadays, it would probably be the internet switchboard, you know what I mean? So you have the ability to switch off the internet. The way it used to work was this. You'd seize the TV tower or whatever, and then the new government comes on and they basically say, due to incredible instability, and of course, this is the other thing. You need to have someone ready to step in, okay? You need to have a political leader pre-groomed, pre-fashioned, ready to slot into that power vacuum once the whole thing. Like Juan Guaido, yes, exactly. But there are, thousands of Juan Guaidos, right? Like, you have to have so then that person comes on and they're like, oh, due to incredible instability, we're going to like take over. You institute like martial law for like a little bit and then hold new elections or whatever, usually in a highly unstable environment that you can control, and boom, you have your color revolution. Now, all of these are really just sort of Marxist tactics, kind of sort of hyper compressed and using sort of like shock troops, you know what I mean? You can also use sort of revolution just to destabilize countries. Maybe you don't really want to control them, you just want them to fuck up. Revolution's great for that. If a revolution happens and you put a complete idiot at the head and the idiot takes over, like Boris Yeltsin might be a good example, right? It destabilizes the entire country because not only is everyone now arguing about whether the revolution was a good or a bad thing, where they were previously arguing about whatever fucking shitty narrative you imported into the country, is our government, is our king good or bad? Is our government democratic or authoritarian? Do we need a change of government? While all these arguments are going on, important things are not getting done. We're seeing this in the West at the moment, right? Everyone's talking about, do women have penises? Everyone's talking about systemic racism. No one's talking about anything of real import. And while that is going on, while that paralysis is happening, things that benefit the revolution are going on underneath and people aren't paying attention to it.
So while people are talking about whether a man is a woman or not, we are having all our rights taken away through a series of draconian bills.
Yep, and they are shipping in literally hundreds of thousands of fighting age men from some of the most violent parts of the world and installing them in hotels and military bases all around the country. I'm sure nothing bad's going to come of that. The funny thing is that if this was happening in another country, right, most people would see this as clearly a military attack. Imagine Russia was doing this, okay?
Yeah.
Imagine that Russia had a country and every year hundreds of thousands of Russian immigrants went into that country, right? Caused a fuss, started fucking shit up, and the government was installing them in like military bases and like hotels all around the country. Everyone would be like, oh my God, the Russians are taking over. But because, systemic racism, you're not allowed to talk about that. It's as if a fighting age male from a war-torn country, as soon as they become black, they are sanctified. They are just, completely absent from the picture. If it was the Irish or the Russians or the Chinese or anyone else, maybe not the Chinese, I don't know, the government would be extremely concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got hundreds of migrants being placed in tiny little villages with hundreds of villagers there. Eventually, they're going to be outnumbered.
What do you mean eventually? They already are outnumbered.
Well, in a lot of places, it's like, 200 to 400,
Yeah.
but the plans are
this is the thing.
The plans are to escalate and take it further, like Scampton, for example.
Everyone says the great, the BBC and all these people say the great replacement is a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
I mean, what else would you call a village of 200 people where 400 migrants are shipped in there? If that is not a replacement, then what is it? An invasion? Again, right? If this was any other country, if it was the Russians doing this, right? Poor sleepy little hamlet in England gets a population of 200 people, gets 400 Russians in. Everyone would be up in arms. But because it's...
What the hell's going on here?
Because
is this Red Dawn?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But because it's immigrants of color, everyone is completely brainwashed about it.
And of course, lots of them are criminals who are throwing their ID in the sea so that they can't be identified. 50-odd% of them are slaves.
Yeah.
And that begs the question, so the British government are complicit in the human trafficking that's going on because they help them bring them in. Why don't they smash the human trafficking rings and end 55% of this issue and send these people back to their families, their threatened families? Well, because they're the ones who are actually conducting the bloody shit in the first place.
I don't think...
You never hear the leftists say that. It's just let them all in. Well, surely the slaves can be allowed to go back to their families, right? At least we should be able to agree upon that.
No, you don't understand. You don't understand. We defeated slavery, right? Slavery is no more. And slavery only affects black people. right? And there is no slavery now, right? But for the slavery there was before, all white people must be held responsible and pay lots of money.
Yeah.
Right? And this sacred narrative is so important that the actual suffering of actual people in slavery now is completely disregarded because it hurts the narrative. And I would go one step further. I think that narrative is an implanted narrative and a destabilization narrative, right? Because it stokes racial conflict. You know what I mean? As all of these kinds of things do. If you have a multicultural society and you broadly disseminate a worldview, right, that one of those cultures is responsible for everything wrong in that society, is responsible for the murder and enslavement of another one, you will get intercultural, interethnic conflict. This is just as night follows day. And so yeah, it's massively destabilizing. I think that countries in the West are being systematically destabilized.
Yeah.
And that there is already a group waiting to step into power when it all starts going even wronger. I don't think things are going to get better. I know I speak to a lot of people, they're like, oh, Chris, you're so pessimistic. I don't see how anyone currently in power or anyone who has any chance of getting anywhere near real power will stop this. I mean, as far as I can tell, the people in power are either completely unaware of this process or they're just pretending that they're completely unaware of this process and they're already captured. Look, the way to stop immigration, right? I mean, look, this is a fucking unpopular opinion, but I'm going to say it. You need to start like using force. You need to start shooting at the boats, right? Like this is like, oh my god, you know, like saying that you would shoot a refugee, dude. A refugee is just a person from the other side of the world. A lot of them aren't fucking refugees for a start, right? We have had many wars where many people have died. Those refugees have killed many people in this country. The idea that you cannot respond with force means that it's like you can do anything except anything that would actually stop the problem. This is basically Rishi Sunak's position. We could do anything except anything that would fix it. You see this with solutions a lot. You know what I mean, right? Like the fertility crisis. Oh, we could do anything except anything that would actually stop it, right? Immigration, same kind of thing. Economy, all these kinds of like things. There are solutions, but the solutions are already pre-ignored. And I get very, very suspicious about that because it's like when someone gets injured, you know, with the medical procedure, right? And they go into the doctor and say, you know, what's wrong with me, doc? And the doctor will like, I don't know, but I know it's not that thing. Right? Like, I absolutely 100% know it's not the thing. And if the thing that you 100% know it isn't, is actually the thing, then nothing you do is going to help.
Nope, nothing at all. I mean, I absolutely did not have SIBO. That was ridiculous. The drugs they gave me do not cause SIBO, acid blockers, just because acid is what, you know, prevents SIBO from happening by balancing the gut. Yeah, I had years of that. I know exactly what you mean.
So, I mean, it seems to me that, I mean, you'll be familiar with this, so will a lot of people watching, that the new society they want to create seems to be very similar to what they're doing in Ukraine at the moment, okay? So, Ukraine is going to be one of the world's first fully digital societies, right? Central bank digital currency, outlawing cash, all of your government stuff will be done on an app. You'll have digital ID. You can even report your neighbors for Russian collusion on the smartphone app.
Oh, of course.
Handy. You know, look, that's what we really need in the UK. What we really need is like a government app, right? Where every single person has a digital ID to go online. And then if you say anything bad, right, some busybody motherfucker can come up and report you to the government for hate speech. I reckon that's what they want. And it's kind of like a a tech version of the USSR, and
Yeah. Are you scared to have kids in case they grass you up?
oh yeah, yeah. Actually, Orwell pointed this out, that in these kind of societies, they're always getting your kids to grass you up, because you have to send them to government propaganda schools. Jesus fucking Christ, this is going to look like doing it for you guys, filming in the rain.
Bravery. Do you want an umbrella?
So what else did you want to know about revolutions?
Well, let's see. So there's a lot of talk about America being a color revolution right now.
Or a revolution of color might actually be like the best way to describe that. You know?
Yeah. So how should Americans view what's happening to their country right now, the destabilization of their country right now? Who is to blame, and what measures can they take to resist it?
Well, okay, so the first important thing to understand is that the first revolution has actually already happened, right? That's what the Great Reset actually was, right? And it was an attempt to do a purge of the government and military and teaching and law and all of these institutions, business, by simultaneously first, this is most clear in the US military. So first they fired anyone who was racist, right? Which meant basically anyone further right of like, shit, I don't know, George Bush, maybe, you know what I mean, right? Anyone who had ever like posted like a Pepe, you're out, okay? Then the second thing, of course, was the vax. Anyone who didn't take the vax, you're out, okay? So that got rid of basically anyone with principles, the vax, and anyone who did not have left-wing politics, the racism thing, right? Then they sucked in a whole bunch of essentially ideological and diversity hire kind of like people, right? And then they fixed it in there with DEI, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And thus this new political commissar class, the racial commissars, effectively, now run all of these institutions, okay? So the first revolution has already happened. The question is whether there can be a counter-revolution, right, that will reverse that trend. It's going to be a lot harder, you know? What can the Americans do? Shit, I don't know. I think there's a committed core of Americans who know very well what the fuck is going on. I know I talked to quite a few of them, and they're very aware of what the fuck's happening. I think everyone's essentially waiting for a change of power at the top. So if Trump gets back in, for example, they can, begin essentially like a counter-revolution. But then you wind up in a situation where there's going to be like another revolution to counter the counter-revolution. And this is part of how a country destabilizes, right? So you get these incredible swings. So every 4 or 8 years, it goes from one extreme to the other. And then when the other side gets in, there's like another purge. And, eventually you wind up in a situation that a lot of countries have been in before revolution, where they have a new government like every 3 months. You know what I mean? Everything is so unstable that as soon as like a new person gets to power, the government falls apart immediately because there's no stability in any of the institutions. And a country like that is ripe for takeover. And once things get bad enough, people will often accept the new regime as long as it stops the instability, which, the Marxists sort of pretend to do, at least at first. But it never lasts for very long, obviously.
Okay, and in Britain, what do you have to say about the destabilization in Britain? How much does it differ from America?
Again, unpopular opinion, but I think there is going to be a massive push against the white English. And it's already sort of materializing, but it's going to get much worse.
Yeah.
There is an idea waiting in the wings, right? Marxists tend to do this. They'll astroturf ideas and they'll have them like on the shelf ready to pull out, of the global majority. Okay? So once the English, the white English, become a minority in their own country, right, you will be able to use democratic politics to further marginalize them by saying, well, you're not the majority anymore, right? And all of a sudden, you will find this massive switch. I reckon it will happen overnight within months, right? Whereas up to that point, everyone has been concerned about the minority this, the minority that, right? All of a sudden, they will revert back to the view that it is the will of the majority that is important all of a sudden, right? After 15 years of, every single policy must be considered about, what the minorities want, they will suddenly pivot and say, we need to consider the majority. That majority is non-white. Therefore, sucks to be you. And I don't think this is going to have a good effect on England at all. It will probably ignite some kind of conflict, although how bad it'll get, I don't know. It's hard to say. I like to think that the English won't just walk into the great night without putting up any kind of a struggle, but it may be too late. If you look at what's happening in Ireland, for example. So in Ireland, they're trying to bus in all the migrants, and the Irish are totally not having it. You got to remember, these are the people that birthed the IRA and stuff like that. They're very, 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 very much not having it. But I don't know.
The most popular boy's name in Galway video said it was Mohammed the other day.
The most popular boy's name in England, I think, has been Mohammed for quite a while, actually. So, yeah. So you could very, very easily get some kind of, Sharia Britain. Or you could use the push for Sharia Britain to ignite some kind of civil conflict, or you could use the calls for Sharia Britain to say, oh, well, we need compromise. Now that whites are in the minority, right, and Christianity is rapidly failing, maybe we should just have some Sharia. You know what I mean, right? Or have Sharia zones. After all, it is their culture, right? Look, who even is English, right? According to the popular conception, if you step off a boat from Somalia onto English soil, you are now English. Essentially. Doesn't matter how long you've been here, where you've been from, whether you know English as a language, any of the culture, you're English now. And this all started a while back with that whole, do English people even have an identity? Remember that? Do the English even have a culture? Yes, they fucking do. It's obvious that the English have a culture to anyone outside England, and that culture is being massively eroded. But you're not allowed to say that because apparently that's a right-wing talking point. But if the Russians were doing it to the Ukrainians, then that would be fine. If the Chinese were doing it to the Uyghurs, that is perfectly acceptable. But you are not allowed to say that it's being done to the English because that's racist for some fucking reason.
Yeah, I saw a Yorkshire Rose video yesterday where a guy was holding an English flag and he was walking through a kind of lefty middle-class town, and the bottom line referenced the white genocide that's going on.
Uh-huh.
And a call was made to the cops, and they came over and detained him for a while, and then they found out that they were only community police officers, not real police officers. But it just goes to show that if you walk through a posh lefty English town with with an English flag, you're going to actually have to deal with rent-a-cops.
Sure, but the flag has been replaced. It's now the pride flag.
Yeah.
Right? The multicultural, sort of blancmange flag, where for gay sex and hormones and not having children and abortion and no more nations. And
less of you, less of you, less of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we're
more
for,
of us,
and
more
that's
of
what
us,
you mean.
more of us. Right? And then once they hit that critical point, all of a sudden, they will rediscover the idea of majority will. You fucking watch. It'll happen overnight. They'll be like, well, all of us, we have to consider the will of the majority, right? Presuming that you can lump all of them together like that. It's been very, very funny actually, watching this process in real time. So, for example, they try and merge vastly disparate groups into a revolutionary force. So they try and use the Muslims and the gays at the same time, despite the fact that they are diametrically opposed, right? But no one, when the Muslims protest a school because they don't want their kids being taught gay, that's fine because that's their culture, right? That's their culture. If white English people do it, right, that's verboten because they don't have a culture, right? They just have racism. That's all the white English have. They don't have culture. They just have racism and slavery and all these bad kind of things. By denying a people a culture, you sort of, I guess, deny them any actual interests. You know what I mean? That people can no longer say, oh, look, we like to do things here in a certain way. But you don't even have a culture. Who gives a fuck? Have you considered what this person from Somalia would like to do? That's their culture. You know what I mean? It's a terrible state of affairs. It's really bad, man. Like, and I'm increasingly coming to the opinion that the things that you can't talk about are more likely than not true. And that's why you can't talk about them. It's got nothing to do with anyone's feelings being hurt. It's got nothing to do with, oh, you know, it might cause this, it might cause that. No. They just don't want people talking about it because it is true. And if people knew that it was true, right, they might be able to organize and push back. You know, like I was saying with the person who gets the shot, goes to the doctor, I'm feeling ill. Oh, I don't know what's wrong with you, but I definitely know it's not that. And if you even ask, and if you even imply that it is that, we're going to fuck you up.
Yeah, with regards to the flag, I was counting the rainbow flags on my way into a town the other day, and I walked past a Church of England church, and there was the pride flag proudly displayed.
Oh, the Church of England is terrible.
And basically, those guys are dying on their arse, that church, and they've received funding to accept this nonsense on their territory, and they're waving it there, and they've got the signs saying we're an inclusive church.
Yep.
And the teddy bears picnics coming up and blah blah blah. Now you might think, well, of course a church is going to have a flag proclaiming paedophilia outside of it. You know, that makes perfect sense.
Oh, you're not allowed to say that, Johnny. How dare you? How dare you? Oh my God.
But to most people it would be quite jarring. But can you unpack what's going on there?
Okay, so a few things are going on there. Okay, so remember how I was saying at first, you get a bunch, if you're trying to destabilize a country, you get a bunch of NGOs in to like give money to causes that support destabilization. Okay, so this is the same thing with the church. The Church of England is now so bad, it got thrown out of the worldwide Anglican communion. So the Church of England spread all over the world, right? Most Anglicans are actually in Africa, right? And the actual English branch of the Church of England just got thrown out of the worldwide Anglican community because they support homosexuality in direct conflict with the Bible and Christianity, and most importantly, all the based black Christians in Africa who are like, we do not want any of this faggotry. Yeah. Why are you supporting this? Why are you gay? You know, and it's sort of the end process of the emasculation of the church, right? This is like a new version of Christianity where you're not allowed to resist anything, right? You're not allowed to say that anything is bad, right? You know, to be a good Christian is to just basically lay down and let everyone and everything walk over you. You're not allowed to resist. You're not allowed to preach. You're not allowed to say anything is bad. You're not allowed to say you don't like homosexuality. You're not allowed to say you don't like abortion. You're not allowed to say you don't like degeneracy. And ecumenism, which is the idea that we all worship the same God. We fucking do not all worship the same God. That is fucking bullshit, right? But this idea is a very, very UN-powered kind of like thing. The idea of a... And I shit you not, this is totally a UN thing from like Alice Bailey and the Lucis Trust and all the theosophical retards that were like went into the forming of the UN. The idea of a world church, right? The idea of one God that everybody can worship, which is of course so watered down as to be completely meaningless. You know what I mean, right? Like, it doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim or Hindu or Jew. You can all worship the same God. No, you can't. They are very different things.
Yeah.
Right? But of course, no one's saying that to the Muslims. No one's going up to the Muslims and saying like, oh, hey, you know that Allah that you worship. He's really, really into homosexuality. Or you should worship like the Christians do. No one's going to the Muslims and saying, oh, well, you know the Christians eat pork. Maybe you should eat pork. Yeah. This shit only works one way. This is the clearest sign of who it's aimed at. It's not aimed equally at everyone. It's aimed very specifically at a certain group of people who are slowly getting their shit destroyed, essentially.
Yeah. But up in Scampton, yeah, they're gradually increasing the amount there as if nobody's noticing.
Yeah.
It's like a social engineer, whereas in some towns they've just splurged double the amount of immigrants than the residents there.
Yeah.
It's absolutely outrageous, and the rapes of young children and women and men that are going on in these towns and all across the south coast are not being reported on by the media, and the police aren't doing anything about them either. They're sweeping them under the rug. And this is to prevent anybody actually understanding what's happening. We're in that stage, we're in that phase where people are still ignorant about what's happening. But
yeah,
I just want to say that one schoolgirl was held down by 3 young men who shouldn't have been in school because they were lying about their age, and 1 raped her. And the schoolgirls were actually outside the school protesting with signs saying the head teachers, the police aren't doing anything about it, pleading to passers-by to help them get protection because they don't feel safe in their own school. That's where our country's at. If that doesn't illustrate it to people, then nothing will.
Look, man, you know the kind of person who would have helped those girls? A fucking racist. Right? And those people have no place in our society.
They
right?
don't.
It's already... I mean, look, this is that phrase, right? That you have no place in our society. What the fuck do you think that means? That's
othering.
That is no. That is a very sinister phrase.
Yeah,
that's like the kind of thing the Nazis might have said about the Jews. They have no place in our society. That it leads to a very, very dark place, right? And they don't. No, well, could have used some like strong local guys maybe to like stand up, but they're not allowed.
Yeah. True.